Velkommen alle sammen. Robert Eggers is back with Werewolf. Got to put the gear on for this occasion. So the trailer that was just released, if it's any indication, this might be his most historically accurate film yet, maybe his best one. I've spent years researching werewolf lore for my own book, about to be released later this month, and I want to break down what we know about the movie so far and how it lines up with real historical record and how it's all related to much older Indo-European warrior cults of initiation, such as berserkers, Ulfhednar of the Viking Age, just to name a couple. So the setup. Werewolf is set in England around 13th century. Eggers picked that date on purpose, and he said that it's basically the last moment of English werewolf lore that could exist for a movie like this, because England, a little after that time, had just about wiped out its wolves to protect the sheep and livestock trade. Once the wolves were gone, the werewolf lore also disappeared from England and Ireland and the British Isles in general. Very, very true. We see werewolf lore and trials as late as 17th and 18th century in other places in Europe, mainly Germany and France, but not really from the British Isles from that early modern period. Eggers' key source is supposed to be Gervase of Tilbury, compiled around 1214. It's one of the best sources we have for werewolves in that point in time, and supposedly the whole movie is in the dialect of that point of time as well, Middle English, and they hired some specialists to help the cast speak that way. There's a little problem though that I would wonder what he's going to do about. What makes the 13th century as an interesting choice is it sits right in the middle of the end of, or the beginning of, a shift of how werewolves were viewed. Go back a bit earlier in time into the Middle Ages, and werewolves were very often nobility. We see Rus, Bulgarian, Slavic princes said to be able to turn into wolves. We have Irish royal lines, kings, the werewolves of Ossory, and other sources that literally trace nobility and royalty of Ireland back to men who could shapeshift into wolves. So at that time, in the Middle Ages up to the late Middle Ages, werewolves were nobility. They were kings and all that. Starting in the 1500s, everything kind of flips. Werewolves became murderers. They were cannibals. They were serial killers. They were servants of the devil. Absolutely very real historical sources that were prosecuted in courts along with the witch trials. Completely reliable records. You guys maybe don't have to believe this, but we have no reason to doubt those sources. They are all considered very reliable sources, so believe it if you want, but the sources say that this was a very, very real thing. So this movie sits right on the gap in between those two eras. The werewolf nobility and royalty of the Middle Ages, and the werewolf criminals and serial killers of the early modern period. So I would be curious to see how much of that transition period is going to make it on screen. And I think from watching the trailer, they are definitely going to blend a little bit of that timeline. I trust Eggers completely with the material. All of his movies, but especially the Northman, that is the most historically accurate Viking film ever made, and by all accounts, he brought that same attention to detail here and history. That he was working with two Oxford professors on the Middle English dialogue and using the historical sources. And he's explicitly said no silver bullets, no werewolf bite as the curse origin, which is all made up later folklore. And that actually tracks out with the real record. The oldest and most consistent method of transformation in the sources is not a bite, it's a salve or an ointment, often paired with a belt or wolfskin. Sometimes they meet a tall, dark man or figure in the forest that gives them the ability to shapeshift into a wolf. All sources we have in the later on periods. The release date is also very cool, said to come out December 25th, lines up perfectly with the actual seasonal patterns in the historical records. Werewolf activity clusters a lot around midwinter, solstice, Christmas in the sources, and that's not unique to werewolves. That's the exact same season the much older berserkers and Koryos and these other wolf warrior Indo-European bands were most active, going back thousands of years before any of these trial records. The witch's sabbath is also very cool. There's definitely a moment in the trailer that shows what appears to be this, a dark ritual gathering. That's a very real and also well-documented connection. Again, coming from 16th, 17th century sources, werewolves and the witches' sabbaths show up very closely together in the record. You know, dancing in circles, wearing masks, communal feasting, and some demonic activities. The movie, if it's even half as accurate as it looks from the trailer, it's going to bridge that gap that I spoke about earlier and show something that most people never consider, besides the really nerdy scholars that get into it in detail, is that werewolves were not a standalone monster myth. They are the last chapter of something much older. That's what my book is all about. There are more than a dozen distinct elements linking historical werewolves to Viking Age berserkers, and beyond that, to the ancient Indo-European Koryos, the youth warrior band tradition, the wolf warriors, men turning into wolves, going back to ancient Greece, ancient Iran. It's nothing new. It's not isolated folklore from the early modern period. The werewolf is just the late degraded survival of a much more ancient warrior initiation cult from thousands of years ago. That's what the book is all about, and if that's the kind of thing you're into, it covers that. Only primary sources, no theory, no nothing, just sources and archaeology all throughout. So it will be out in a few weeks from today. If you guys would like to check that out, the link will be below, or check back in on the website. But that's all for today. Vi ses nästa gång.